but we are really honored and so happy that you have found time in your schedule to be with us here at Anshe Emet. So thank you very much, Commissioner.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Thank you all.
So let me just say a few words about the Commissioner. And I want to, I forgot my card. So I'm supposed to also acknowledge some special guests that we have. Certainly, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky is with us today. Illinois State Representative Bob Morgan, thank you for being with us. And the New York State Comptroller, we thank you for being with us. We are honored by your presence today. So, Commissioner Brandon Johnson began his career teaching at Jenner Academy in Cabrini Green, then at the Westinghouse College Prep. He later became an organizer with the Chicago Teachers Union. In 2018, Commissioner Johnson was elected commissioner of the 1st District of Cook County, where he led efforts to pass the Just Housing Ordinance, which prohibited housing discrimination against formerly incarcerated people. As commissioner, he also collaborated with colleagues to eliminate the gang database, secure legal representation for immigrants facing deportation, and advance recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day. In the wake of civil uprisings in the summer of 2020, he organized the county board to commit to the budget for Black lives and investments in healthcare, public transportation, internet access, and affordable housing. Brandon and his wife Stacy live in Austin, where they're raising their 3 children, Owen, Ethan, and Braden. His mayoral slogan, "Build a stronger Chicago for all." It's such a pleasure to welcome you, and I want to tell you just a little bit about the people of this congregation and where you're at here at Anshe Emet. Our congregation is one of the oldest Jewish congregations in Chicago. Next year, we're going to be celebrating our 150th anniversary.
Wow.
Thank you. Our congregation is made up of about 1,300 family units. Makes it the largest conservative congregation in the Chicago area. And we are proud to be in partnership with the Bernard Zell Anshe Emet Day School, the Chicago Jewish Day School, and we're just thrilled that you are here. And I hope that you see in the turnout today, as well as the hundreds of screens that are watching us around Chicagoland, that we are lovers of the city of Chicago. We are committed to a participatory democracy, and we are honored that both of the mayoral candidates have joined us for a conversation. So I have a couple questions, some of which I was privileged to ask you at the mayoral forum at the DeSable Museum. Would I get you some water?
No, I'm okay.
Oh, you're good? Okay. A few weeks ago, and some of the questions come from members of our community. So let's get started. If you are elected mayor of the city of Chicago, what would you like to say that your biggest accomplishment was at the end of 4 years? So at the end of your first term of office, what would you like to say was your largest accomplishment?
Well, thank you for that question, and I'm very humbled to be with you. I have to admit, you remind me of all of my Sunday school teachers. So I don't know if you know much about the Black Tradition Church, but you are bringing so much comfort and a little bit of nervousness at the same time. Because I really want to get all the questions right.
And your father, I understand, is a
My
member.
father is a pastor. My grandfather's a pastor. So you know how deeply traumatized that I am. So. But
Well, I'm going to take that as a compliment. I guess.
It is definitely a compliment. You know, I'm deeply tethered, of course, to my faith and my belief and my values. And what my values are, I've expressed that throughout my entire career. And so over the course of my first term, having the opportunity to serve as the mayor of the city of Chicago, the structural deficit that we are living through right now as a result of the politics of old. I want the structural deficit, I want that eliminated. I want up to $1 billion of new investments over the course of my first term, and all of those investments into the critical services that all of our communities rely upon. And I want to do it without raising property taxes. Doing that at the end of my first term, will feel very proud that our values ring true and through our ability to lead this city.
The sanctuary that you're sitting in was actually built in 1910. Those windows in the back with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln in the New York Harbor were not the original windows. In 1940, the original windows, which was a creation scene, were shattered by neo-Nazis. So anti-Semitism in this country is something that the people of this congregation, Jews throughout this country, are very familiar with. In the past few weeks, the Anti-Defamation League reported that anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. reached their highest level since the ADL began recording them in 1979. The incidents include assault, vandalism, harassment, and they have increased by a third just in the last year. We've reached 3,700 cases in 2022. And to put this statistic in context, consider that in 2013, the ADL reported 751 incidents like this. This past week, when a former president was indicted, what you have heard again and again by some of his supporters is the name George Soros. That is an anti-Semitic dog whistle. It shows just how much anti-Semitism has become normalized in America. So how will your administration respond to this growing epidemic?
You know, I saw a recent statistic over the last year just here in Chicago alone, where there's been a 71% increase in hate crimes, of which the vast majority of individuals who've experienced this hatred have been Black families and Jewish families in particular. And one of the things that I think it's important that we constantly lean into is the collective struggle to be heard, to be seen, and to be respected. And discrimination and hatred against Jewish people, as well as the culture, that is something that we will never accept or tolerate in a Brandon Johnson administration. And I'm going to do everything in my power, the authority that I have as mayor of the city of Chicago, to use the platform to not just speak out against discrimination and hatred against Jewish people and the culture, but make sure that within my administration that we are providing the necessary support and tools that protect families, because that is something that is incredibly dear to me. Being surrounded by your family is what sustains us. Having family members leave the space of our most sacred space, which is our home, and to be discriminated against or demonstrations of hatred against family members based upon who we are and who we worship is something that we have to protect. And I'm very much committed to making sure that my administration does everything in its power to make sure that Jewish families and the culture is protected.
I want you to know that this congregation is very much committed to the Black-Jewish dialogue. We work very closely with Bright Star Church and Pastor Chris Harris, who I think you know well, and that is something that we are committed to. At the same time, we are aware that there are unique features to racism against Black people, and there are unique features to anti-Semitism that also have to be acknowledged, even as we acknowledge what joins us together, we also face unique challenges ourselves. And so we're heartened to know that you have a commitment to this important idea. And I have a follow-up here from one of our teens in the congregation. Anshe Ahmed, as a synagogue, is not only dedicated to standing against anti-Semitism, but to build interfaith solidarity across the city as a way to fight against hate. As mayor of Chicago, how would you plan to promote and maintain an environment of collaboration, allyship, and civic action across Chicago's many faith communities?
I believe we have to be intentional using the spaces that are sacred, like our places of worship and gatherings, to be on display. Because to me, it's not just simply using government resources or spaces to highlight our interfaith connections. But what I would love to see, and I'm happy to lead in this, is to make sure that our places of worship where we gather become the central focus of how that collaboration can manifest as well as be exposed. Because sometimes what happens, as I've seen, when communities and cultures look to embrace one another, we use our food. Many times there might be some sharing of language. But I want to make sure to whomever this teen is, that where we gather in the places that are sacred, the places that we honor, that these become the spaces where that interfaith connects. Because what better way to display the interconnections between our cultures and our faith through the very places in which we gather. And I'm looking forward to doing that. I know we talk a lot about holy seasons and holiday seasons. I hope that we do not limit our interactions around those days in that particular time, but that we're intentional about it throughout the year.
I want you to know that you have a partner in this congregation in that holy, important work.
Thank you.
I want to move on to a conversation about crime. It's a cause for concern for every citizen of Chicago. What would you say distinguishes your approach from that of your opponent in terms of crime, and why do you think it will be more successful?
Well, I believe the greatest distinction between me and my opponent as it relates to public safety, it's my lived experience. So as you indicated, I'm raising an incredible family. My wife and I, first of all, will be celebrating 25 years of marriage in June. So I'm hoping to have a big surprise party as mayor of Chicago, so please do not tell anyone.
Okay.
And our 3 children, Owen, Ethan, and Braden, these are the most precious individuals to us. And we're raising our family in Austin. It's a beautiful community. Great housing stock. We have great, parks, but it's been underfunded. But it is one of the most violent neighborhoods in the entire city of Chicago. In fact, there are more homicides over the last 4 years in Austin than many of the communities in the entire city of Chicago combined. 3 times as much in some instances. And so we wake up to a neighborhood that is loved but yet disinvested in, and as a result of it, public safety is top of mind. And so here's what my public safety approach. We deal with the immediate crises. The immediate crisis requires us to actually solve crime, enforce the laws that are on the books, make sure that we are spending dollars to implement the consent decree, but also we double the amount of young people that we hire throughout the city of Chicago. We know there's a direct correlation between youth employment and violence reduction. That approach hasn't been taken. We also know that we have to pass treatment, not trauma, but also have mental health supporters throughout the entire city of Chicago, including mental health support for law enforcement. 37% of the 911 calls that come through are mental health crises. The hardest part about doing a job is having to do someone else's job along with yours. I'm a public school teacher. I've seen trauma in my classrooms. Because I was raised by pastors, I have a unique ability to walk people through a couple of minutes of a crisis. But I am not a social worker, I'm not a counselor. And what happens is repeatedly, law enforcement shows up to people's homes that require an EMT or a mental health crisis professional. Passing treatment, not trauma, will allow for law enforcement to focus on the more severe violent crimes. 60% of the violence that happens in the city of Chicago, it happens in 6% of the city. We already know where it's going to happen. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen anywhere else, but we know where there's a hyper-concentration. My public safety plan is a smart plan. We talk about being tough in the city of Chicago. It's easy to be tough in Chicago. We're born tough in Chicago. What we need is an intellectual capacity that allows us to have a strategic approach to solving the immediate challenge, but also thinking long-term. When we have wealth gap in the city of Chicago, where for every $1 a white family earns, a black family earns 1 cent. For every $1 that a white family earns, a brown family earns 8 cents. We know that there's a distinction that characterizes violent communities. That's abject poverty as well as isolation. And so my public safety plan also responds to the root causes by having an economic agenda that invests in people, because that is the greatest thing that we can do, is love people enough to invest in them. And that's what I'm going to do when I'm mayor of the city of Chicago. Oh, thank you. No one believes me that I needed water, and yes, I do need water.
I believed you.
As long as you don't ask me to walk on it to get your vote. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Not at all. But in our tradition, the water would have to split for you to walk through it.
Here, here.
So the Chicago public school system is in difficult straits pre-COVID and post-COVID. A decade ago, in 2013, the school's district budget was $5.3 billion, which meant that there was $13,200 for every student of the 403,000 students. In 2023, the budget is $9.4 billion, which adds up to about $29,400 for each of the 322,000 students. Meanwhile, over the past decade, enrollment is down by about 81,000 students. You're a former teacher. You're a present-day commissioner. And I just want to take note of the fact, if you have a child in a Chicago public school, raise your hand, or have had a child in a Chicago public school. So we have a lot of people here who are taking a real interest in this question, because just like you spoke about your children, everyone's child and their education is a holy thing. So as a former teacher and a present-day commissioner, how does your plan differ from your opponent?
I believe in public education. I do. And school privatization has been abused. You know, we talk a lot about just our history, and there's some very powerful words from Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., where he warned the country repeatedly not to be moved by these buzzwords. And those buzzwords existed a generation ago, like right to work. And these were tools that were used to give people a false promise that ultimately separated us from what should be the public good. And many of you all in this room have organized to bring an elected representative school board to the city of Chicago, which we fought for and won. We also fought to change the funding formula so that school districts would be funded based upon need as we go back to poverty and not on a per pupil basis. And so the first thing that I do as mayor of the city of Chicago is, one, we really fully embrace an elected representative school board. And until we get towards a fully funded, a full representative school board, we're gonna have a community process to make sure that every community is represented on the school board with the 11 appointments that I'll still have. But we also will push and require the Chicago Public Schools to embrace the new funding formula, because right now, CPS is missing out on $1 billion because they refuse to embrace the funding formula. Here's the third thing. Well, that's actually the third thing. What I want for my family, because I believe I'll be the first mayor, likely in a generation, who actually sends their kids to the public schools. I believe Mayor Jane Byrne, I believe her daughter went to CPS. And so what I want for my family, I want for every single family. So my oldest son, we live on the west side of Chicago. He's a Kenwood Bronco. There's always at least one Kenwood Bronco in the room, by the way. I'm sure there's one here. But he attends Kenwood because he plays the violin. There's not a school on the west side of Chicago that offers orchestra. So we commute 45 minutes a day outside of our neighborhood just so that our child has the ability to be part of an orchestra. But here's the biggest difference. When it comes to public education, we have to make sure that we're not just talking about the curriculum in the narrow form of curriculum. We have to talk about art, music, the technical manufacturing opportunities that are available, the trades, like really investing in making sure that the curriculum is fully represented of the expression of children. We cannot continue to allow a bubble sheet to determine whether or not a child is ready to succeed. You know, one of the most frustrating things about running for mayor is that whenever the press asks me questions, it feels like a standardized test. Like no one wants a full intellectual response. And that's a disservice to the people of Chicago. And apparently there's a young child who agrees with me in the hallway.
You have been, there has been a number of articles and debate about your thinking about selective enrollment schools. So what is your position on that?
So my position is this: having gone through the application process of trying to get a fully funded school for your child, it's one of the most arduous, humiliating processes that my wife and I have had to endure. Because the first time our oldest son, he's 15 now, when we were preparing him for kindergarten, he had to go into a room by himself with two other adults for them to assess him whether or not he is prepared for a fully funded school. I do not know what the boy talked about when he went into the room. I just know that he was just fixated on ice cream cones for like 2 hours after that. And I'm thinking to myself, my child's ability to get into a fully funded school is going to be based upon one question that he remembered talking about. And we have no idea what happened in there. I'm not opposed to selective enrollment. What I'm opposed to is a stratified system that sets up winners and losers. Every school should have what it needs. Why are we asking parents? This is what I mean by thank you for giving me the ability to have an intellectual conversation. Public education at the expense of the state, particularly in the South, after all, is a Negro idea. Those are the words of W.E.B. Du Bois. Black liberation is deeply tied to public education. And we're asking parents in the city of Chicago to apply for something that is free. It's not that I oppose selective enrollment. I get why it exists. But every school should be like Whitney Young, Jones, Lane Tech. Children receiving an email, because you all have received these emails, because my family received these emails. When your child takes a test and the email comes back and it declares your child ineligible for a public education. That's what the email says to parents. They call us ineligible. I want to make sure that every single child has access to a fully funded neighborhood school, and every school should have everything that it needs, and every family deserves that.
One of the people that's working on your campaign has been pointing to her watch. Now, normally I don't pay attention to that, but today I will, and I will ask one last question. Forums like this are an equivalent of a job interview. And the mayor of the city of Chicago is a very big job. It's a city with a great history, but a troubled history. It's a city with a $28 billion budget, many departments, tens of thousands of workers, and it's a job that calls on somebody with significant managerial skills. And there are pension issues and budget issues, and it calls for collaboration on every level of society. So as we ask in job interviews, what makes you the best person for this job?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm so geeked to answer this question. Can I just have 2 minutes?
So we're both paying
Yeah,
attention
so we're
to this.
working together. See how we're collaborating already together? So, first of all, I was raised in a very large family, and I'm grateful for that upbringing. So it was 10 of us. I'm a middle child, so that probably explains a lot up here. You know, I'm gonna cry and laugh any minute now. It's like the proclivity of a middle child. You know, being raised in a family of 10, my parents were also foster parents. So our home was quite chaotic a lot. And we had one bathroom. Exactly, right? So if nothing else, you do know I know how to negotiate, right? Ally with your sisters. Those are the best allies you could ever have. But being raised in that family environment, here's what my father taught us. Be compassionate, be collaborative, and of course, you gotta be competent. It's not a lot of margin for error. Just isn't, not with one bathroom. You gotta be collaborative because you're gonna need everyone. But you also have to demonstrate care. So these are the values, the principles. And I'm the only one in this race who's ever been elected. The only one. I manage multi-billion-dollar budgets. That the people who elected me to serve in one of the largest bodies of government in the entire world elected me again. I'm grateful to have the support of Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and Congressman Garcia Davis. Of course, Representative Morgan is here as well. It's got my back. There are a number of people who recognize that my leadership is what the city of Chicago needs. Someone who can bring people together, a multicultural, multi-generational movement that took a brother who was polling at 2.3% and is on this platform today. Because the people of Chicago know that leadership in this moment requires someone who can bring people together. And dare I might say something though, this last part. Here's why I'm absolutely confident that I have the ability to lead today. It's not just the surrounding of great leaders. It's not it solely. But if you look at all of your best executives, look at what branch of government they come from. I'm supported by President Toni Preckwinkle. She was a legislator, right? Mayor Harold Washington was a legislator. President Barack Obama was a legislator. President Joe Biden was a legislator. Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson is a legislator. The best executives understand how the legislative branch works because you need someone who can actually pull people together. That's the type of leadership that I bring. Of course, my opponent has been fired every single job that he's had. And I've been hired. And I'm counting on you all to hire me April 4th so we can bring this city together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are very grateful that Commissioner Johnson took time to be with us and engage in this really thoughtful dialogue. And the last thing that I want to say that we both agree on is that everyone has an obligation to vote. So please make your voices heard. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.